You're entering the MSP Zone, a podcast for the managed services community, covering news, analysis, and interviews from around the globe. Elevate your MSP game by staying in the MSP Zone. And now, your host, Charles Weaver.
Auditing versus preparing for an audit, two very different things. We're going to explain how each is important and the role of the MSP in each right now. Okay. Compliance, whether it's a baseline security review or it's an actual project where the MSP is helping a customer get prepared for a particular certification or audit outcome, like a SOC 2 or an ISO or a CMMC. There's so many MSPs doing some really wonderful, amazing things today, but I'm seeing some confusion. Part of that, a lot of it's not actually coming from the MSP market. They're coming from consultants, but that's a whole nother episode. We'll deal with that later. But I wanted to talk to you about the role of the MSP in helping customers with audits, with certifications, and the really important thing is preparing that customer for an audit, certification, review, whatever it may be. All right, here's what you need to know. I'm going to give a couple, two, maybe three different scenarios that are going to be very, very common. Chances are you're probably doing at least one of these things, maybe two or three of these things, but at least hopefully you're doing one of these. And I'll start with the least, the most common, and then I'll get to the more complicated as we go. Number one, an audit or review, whatever you call it, there's a lot of MSPs who are doing what I'm about to describe for their customers and for their prospects, right? And not a managed services customer yet. They want to be, but the MSP is doing something before they actually sign them, right? What would that look like? It might look like a baseline security review, right? You're just trying to figure out what you're dealing with. Maybe you run a vulnerability scan, maybe you run a few other types of tools, but generally it's going to involve some sort of scan of the network, trying to figure out how many devices you're going to be managing, what types of devices these are. Are they patched? Are they old? Are they new? What types of operating systems are they running? That type of stuff. And then you might be an MSP who goes a little bit further. And maybe you're going to do not just a vulnerability scan or a scan of the network to identify the objects or endpoints that you manage, but you might go further and start to ask kind of probing questions related to the business of the customer in question. You might be saying, hey, are you backing up your data? Are you using multi-factor authentication? Are you using a password manager? Do you have EDR? Do you even know what EDR means? And things like that. Questions that are going to get to the preparedness and the security positioning of that customer prospect before engaging. All right. These are all very common things for MSPs. Again, wouldn't be surprised if you're listening to this and saying, yeah, we do that too. That's fine. I don't call that an audit per se. I would call that maybe a security review, a security assessment, whatever you want to call it. But that's a very common business practice in the managed services world. I would let you know that there's a lot of cyber consultants who also do the same thing, but don't do the managed services element. And I'm seeing a fair amount of conflict in terms of how the MSP approaches it versus the consultant. But again, that's a whole nother episode. We'll deal with that later. Now, the second stage or the second level or option of certification or audit beyond the security review might look like a actual alignment or review or comparison benchmark, however you choose to call it, of a customer prospect against a given framework, right? We talk a lot about this on the channel, like CIS, CSF. There's a number of different frameworks. I'm using those because those frameworks do not have a certification at the end of them, right? All they're doing is listing a set of controls, and then the MSP says, what are my customers, potential customers' controls against any given framework. And so what will happen is you'll end up with things that the customer is doing, which is good. They're compliant with that control. And then you'll end up with a list of things that the customer is not doing, which is a gap. That is also a very appropriate thing to do. It might be a little bit more involved than just a basic pre-screening or security assessment before a prospect becomes a managed services customer. This might be the type of engagement like a project that you would do for an existing, maybe a break-fix customer that you want to transition over to managed services. You might do that for that type of a customer in order to really get to building out for them a very robust managed services scope of services that will not only meet their demands, but also make them compliant against a known framework. Again, really good advice. I know MSPs that are doing that today. Great. Keep doing that. And then the third level would be preparing an MSP for an actual audit or certification, like a SOC 2, like a ISO, like a CMMC, etc. That's where you get into a little bit of more rules. And I'll just describe it as this. The MSP that is preparing that customer for an actual certification outcome, where there's going to be a third party doing that review, the MSP has a role that is really important. But that role is very defined, and there's a line that you don't want to cross as the MSP. And you don't want to cross the line of being the counselor, the advisor to the customer, preparing and helping them. Maybe you're project managing a little bit, but you're also doing a little bit of evidence procurement, right? Getting stuff together for the customer that is going to be asked of by the auditor. We come across that a lot in the MSP Alliance and the work that we do with MSPs and being certified. And that's great. That's really good. You can make money doing it. You can help your customer and provide a very, very valuable service to the customer. But when it comes to you saying, hey, this is what the outcome is going to be or not be, that's where, you really don't want to cross that line. Now, you can give an opinion and say, hey, look, I think you better buy MFA from us because you're not going to get very far with any framework, any certification if you're not using multi-factor authentication. Well, that's a pretty easy, low-hanging fruit type of a statement to make, and it would be completely true. But that's very different than you actually being the entity that tests the customer and does the official auditing of that specific control, which you would not be able to do. Now, you may be saying, well, why wouldn't I be able to do that? Well, because you can't test your own work. If you're the MSP and you're actually doing that managed service offering for the customer, you can't also be the entity that does the testing and the evaluation. That should make sense, which is why we have the age-old rule that if you're a managed services company, generally speaking, you shouldn't be doing anything close to pen testing, penetration testing for your customers, because that would be a little bit too close for comfort. You'd be testing your own work, and that's not really advisable. Most people wouldn't accept it anyway. So the role of the MSP in audit preparation, in certification preparation, or general cybersecurity assessments or security assessments of any kind is very well established. A lot of MSPs do it. A lot of MSPs make money at it. And a lot of MSPs do fantastic work in helping their customers. But there is that line, that you don't want to cross of becoming the tester, the examiner, the auditor. That's where you kind of just want to stop there, know what your boundary is, and do the work that leads up to that, but not going over it. If you follow those simple rules, you'll be fine. Your customer will thank you for it, and everyone will make out in the end. Hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you will get notified when future episodes are released. We will see you next time in the MSP Zone.